Okay, I'm going to get started if that's okay with everyone. So first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me. Hope you can hear me okay. So I'm Shelley Stapley and I'm the Senko at Charlton High. Sorry, there's more people joining. Sorry, I'm gonna keep stopping. Hopefully not. Okay, so today's session, I'm really sorry, it's going to be me talking a lot, so apologies for that. But when we've run sessions for specific year groups in the past, we found that it works best if I take questions at the end. And that way I can get back to you separately and we're not discussing the specifics about students in front of others. So I hope that's okay. And thank you for your interest. So there's been lots of people interested in this session, which is lovely. And we've even got some other secondary schools attending, and we've got some primary schools as well. So that's really lovely. So just to start off then with what I will be covering today. So I'm going to be talking about what autism is, how it's diagnosed in Manchester, what tools and strategies we use to support students with autism at Charlton High, and where to find out more information and advice. So this information today has been produced in collaboration with other schools from within our trust, one of which is a specialist school for autism. And I've just adapted this session to focus specifically on what we do at Charlton High. So I thought I'd start by briefly introducing some of the Access and Achievement team. And for anyone that is not part of Charlton High, this is what we call our SEND department. Just one second, I'm just going to pause there a second because there was someone waiting. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, so we're a big school, so we each have responsibility for different areas of SEND. So I'm the second one down on the left, as you can see, and I look after, I take responsibility for SEND students in year 10 and 11 this year. And then my colleagues Anna and Kevin take responsibility for year 7, 8 and 9 SEND students between them. We also have a team of teaching assistants not shown here who work with some of our SEND students as well. Sorry about that, I'm going all over the place. So just a brief introduction on what autism is then. So I'm well aware that most people will have signed up to this session knowing what autism is. So please forgive me for the next few minutes if that is the case. So autism is a lifelong developmental disability that affects how a person communicates and relates to other people and how they experience the world around them. So people with autism may experience differences in social interaction, social communication, restrictive and repetitive behaviour, activities or interests, and sensory processing. Later on in this session, I'm going to look at each of these 4 areas of need separately in terms of what they mean and what strategies can help. Okay, so I included this slide as I think autism can be very misunderstood. So it is a spectrum condition, but not in the simplistic way that some people imagine. So people with autism can have strengths in some areas of need and weaknesses in others. For example, some people with autism may have significant sensory difficulties, but their social skills might be quite well developed. So autism can be a complicated condition to understand. It's also more likely that a person with autism is contending with other conditions. For example, it's believed that around half of autistic people may also have a learning disability. I'm just going to let a few more people in from the lobby. Okay, so as I've just mentioned, it's important to understand that lots of people with autism also have other conditions. So some of the conditions that overlap with autism are listed here. And apologies for all the acronyms. I'll just explain a couple for anyone that isn't sure. Okay, so ODD is oppositional defiant disorder. And then a little bit further down, ADHD, attention deficit disorder. ADHD, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. A little bit further down than that, OCD is obsessive compulsive disorder. And then a little bit further down than that, SPLD is specific learning difficulties, and that covers things like dyslexia. So this can mean that understanding and meeting the needs of our students with autism can be quite complicated, depending on the individual student. So just a few facts and figures here for you. So autism is the most common primary need for pupils who have an EHCP, which is an educational healthcare plan. 70% of pupils with autism do attend a mainstream setting. And then in Manchester, all of these terms refer to autism. So there's autism spectrum condition and autism spectrum disorder are the main ones that we hear and that we refer to. But you may also hear childhood autism, pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified, Asperger's syndrome, and pathological demand avoidance. Around 1.1% of the population have a diagnosis of autism, and we know that 5 times as many males as females are diagnosed with autism. So you may be aware that girls with autism can present very differently to boys. It can also be more difficult to identify and tends to be diagnosed at an older age than boys. In today's session, I'm not going to go into details about the differences between boys and girls in terms of autism, but there's plenty of information online. And we know that around 100,000 children in the UK have autism, and 1 in 3 autistic people develop mental health difficulties. Okay, so how is autism diagnosed? So there are 4 areas of difficulty which are considered when diagnosing autism, which I've mentioned earlier. So that's sensory processing difficulties, communication difficulties, social understanding difficulties, and information processing difficulties. That's not to say that a person with autism will be affected by all 4. Having autism will affect people in different ways. Okay, so in Manchester, this is what happens in terms of diagnosis. So diagnosis is made through the assessment pathway for social communication difficulties, and referrals usually come from GPs or from schools. So parents and schools will both separately complete assessment documents, which then goes to panel, and the panel, along with those documents from school and from parents, will consider an autism-specific developmental and family history, observations in more than one setting, so that might be in school, that might be at home, that might be in the clinic, communication, behaviour and mental health assessments, a physical examination, and tests and assessments for other conditions where appropriate. And then if a child is felt to meet the diagnostic criteria, then a diagnosis will be given and a full report and feedback will be given to parents, and us as a school usually receive a copy of that a couple of weeks later. And then families will be invited on a post-diagnostic group run by CAMHS. And just to say that the waiting list for social communication assessment is currently quite long. I think last we heard it was around 18 months to 2 years. Okay, so just some really basic facts and figures from our school. So as you can see, we have a high number of students on the SEND register. We're higher than national average and higher than the average for Manchester. Our biggest area of needs are social, emotional, mental health difficulties and specific learning difficulties, which covers dyslexia. Autism is actually our 5th largest area of need. It's probably a lot further up the rankings than this, but lots of our students are undiagnosed and may fall into a different category in terms of SEM. So we've got 39 students with diagnoses, but lots more that we know have autistic traits and or are under assessment for autism. Okay, so what do autistic young people and adults want? So recent research and legislation has been really clear on what people with autism want. So they want the right support at the right time, choice and control, meaningful activity and employment, good health and emotional well-being, inclusion in local communities, and acceptance and understanding. And these are very much at the heart of every strategy we put in place to support our students with autism. We really believe in working with parents to identify difficulties and helping to remove or alleviate any barriers that our students may face in terms of their learning. Okay, so before I go into specifics in terms of the strategies that may help our students, it may be useful to understand how information is shared with our teachers. So this information may come from my department, the SEND department, it may come from CAMS, it may come from you as parents, it may come from the students themselves or other staff members. But one of the ways that we skill our staff up is through whole school training. So training on autism takes place at least annually. In fact, this year, as well as being part of the September inset, it will be part of the upcoming January inset too. And two of the other tools that we use are pupil passports and Who is in My Class documents, which I'm going to go into a bit of detail about now. So these three things are not the only things that we use. There are obviously the good old-fashioned emails, good old-fashioned conversations and meetings, but these three things are three of the more structured things that we have in place in terms of sharing information. Okay, so pupil passports. So here is an anonymised example of a pupil passport, which every student on the SEND register has. So they're available electronically and are accessed by all staff, and they are updated regularly. So as you can see, they outline the students' strengths, the students' needs, and how to support them in class. We ensure that students contribute to these and make sure that the strategies are as personalised as possible. We've just invested in a new system around these, which means that it will become much easier to share these with you as parents electronically, and for you to make some adjustments to them and contribute yourselves. And then this document here is an example of a Who is in My Class document. So teaching assistants complete these for any classes that they work with, and they are shared with teachers. So while most classes don't have a teaching assistant support in them, our teaching assistants do work with a lot of our students with autism. So the document clearly states which students may need additional support in the class, what specific targets those students are working towards, and the specific strategies that work for them in terms of removing their barriers to learning. Okay, so I'm now going to talk about each of the area of needs separately in terms of autism. And as I've already touched upon, our students may not have needs in all four areas. So we therefore start by identifying where the needs are and then putting strategies in place to support the students. So most of these strategies will be adjustments within the classroom and within the school environment. Some of them are provided outside of the classroom, but as I said, mostly it's adjustments within the classroom. And I've just put a quote on the bottom here to emphasise this point about support needing to be very personalised and specific to that student. So if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. I read that quote several years ago when I started to work in special needs education, and I still find it to be very, very true. Okay, so the first area of difficulty I'll talk about is social understanding. So students with autism may have differences in their social understanding, and this includes the use of and understanding of social language and can lead to difficulties understanding social behaviour. This can include finding it difficult to understand how others are feeling. The use of social language and being able to use this intuitively and knowing how to interact appropriately are areas which pupils with autism may have areas of difficulty in. And these difficulties may be most obvious in unstructured times, such as break or lunch times, or during transition between lessons. So during lessons, these differences may present as pupils shouting out or interrupting, and pupils may speak to the teachers as they would peers or parents, or make comments which are inappropriate. Pupils may stick rigidly to rules and want to point out when others break rules. Pupils may have literal understanding of language and struggle to understand that it's okay for others to have a different view. And pupils may have differences in the way they interpret and regulate emotions, both of their own and those of others. And pupils can find it difficult to know how to respond if others are hurt or upset. And some of the things that might help in school are, well, there's comic strip conversations, and these are a simple visual representation of a conversation, so they can help a student to see other perspectives amongst other things. We also use social stories, which is an explanation using words and pictures, step by step, about what will happen in situations which are causing anxiety. And then we also structure group work, so allocating roles works really well here. And it helps students who struggle to understand social rules or struggle with organisational skills in social situations. Okay, so secondly, social communication and language. So students with autism can have difficulties processing and retaining verbal information, and this can be the case even if the student presents with good verbal skills themselves. So students can find it difficult to interpret facial expressions. A student's ability to process language can become more difficult when they're anxious or stressed. Students may not understand language which is ambiguous, sarcasm or idioms. And eye contact can be very difficult, and such can seem unusual. And the variety of social skills needed to engage and interact with others can lead to students spending time on their own. So some of the things that can help are visuals. So most students with autism find things easier to understand when they're provided with visual support. So for example, that might be pictures, mind maps, flowcharts, providing instructions in lists with tasks broken down, avoiding open-ended questions, or provide some structure around open-ended questions, ensuring students are given time to process information and not put them on the spot. In lessons, using a student's name when giving instructions is really powerful, and ensuring that work is broken up into smaller parts. Abstract ideas needing concrete examples is a really important one, and this can be simpler than it sounds. So for example, if I was going to introduce probability to one of my maths classes, I might start with a discussion about the lottery or about the weather, and I may even start, which I've done recently, in terms of pulling names out of hats and discussing the probability of what's happening there. And then practicing conversation skills, so listening, greetings, awareness of appropriate personal space, talking about different topics, joining and taking turns in a conversation, knowing when a conversation has ended. So this can be both at school and at home that this is practiced. Okay, and thirdly, we have difficulties with information processing and interests. So autistic people can find the world unpredictable and confusing. They can prefer to have a daily routine which doesn't change and happens every day. And this can include eating the same food every day or always travelling the same way to school. Obsessive interests, routine and repetitive behaviour can be a source of pleasure, as well as being a way for the student to self-regulate. These can also limit the student's involvement in other activities, and changes can cause distress or anxiety. So some special interests can seem unusual to others but are highly important to the student. And the interests can start from a young age and can be linked to education and employment choices. So differences in how information is processed can be a strength for students with autism, allowing focus on the smallest detail and the ability to persist until an outcome is achieved. So moving on to things that can help in this area. So we've got visual prompts, which I've mentioned previously. Reasonable adjustments being made in terms of knowing that some children will need longer to organise themselves at the beginning and ending of lessons. The use of visual timetable to ensure students know what is happening and when. Making the best use of special interests where possible, so as a hook into lessons. or as a motivator within the lessons. And then timers can be used between activities, so egg timers or electric timers. And then as well as this, lots of the strategies mentioned in previous sections will also be relevant here as well. Sorry, just letting someone in. Okay, and then so finally, the last section is about sensory difficulties. So students with autism can experience differences in the way they perceive and process sensory information. All of us constantly make responses to sensory input from within our bodies and from within the environment. And students with autism can have hypo, which is under, or hyper, which is over sensitivities to tastes, smells, sounds, touch, lights and colours. And these differences can impact on students' learning as well as how they may be feeling, thinking, behaving or responding. This will also impact on how a student is able to focus and engage in learning at a given time. Sensory information which has been misinterpreted can cause pupils to seem to overreact, and this can include reacting to a bump by another student as if they've been hurt, or underreact, for example, taking a long time to get changed for PE. And these differences can lead to students avoiding situations which may cause distress. And things that may help, so movement breaks and wobble cushions are really helpful in terms of sensory overload. Calm spaces and timeout can help decrease and avoid sensory overload. We have zones of regulation and the incredible 5-point scales, which support students, and I'm going to give a couple of examples of those in a second. We use ear defenders to support students during times of days that are particularly noisy, so lunch times, assemblies, maybe even music lessons. And there's specialist clothing available for people who have sensory sensitivities around touch and texture. And again, as I've said, lots of the other strategies that I've mentioned would be relevant here as well. Okay. So as mentioned, we use personalised 5-point scales with our students, and the scales provide a visual model for students to rate their emotions and feelings, and it allows them to share how they're feeling in a non-verbal way. So the scales can focus on different things, for example, anxiety, anger, speaking volume, whatever it is that they're working on or whatever it is they're finding difficult. And the idea is that they support students to understand their emotions and become aware of things that can help them as they increase up the scale. So the scales are developed on a one-to-one basis with students, and the students very much decide on the content of each scale. We often link these to special interests. So, for example, recent ones that we have done within the department have included manga characters. So days of the week, Saturday being a 1, being good, and Monday being a 5, so feeling pretty bad, and all the different days in the week in between for various reasons. My personal favourite recently was the Nicolas Cage film characters. There was just a special interest there, and he had a real knowledge of all the different characters, and some were good, some were bad. Pokemon, and we've also done songs, so with Real Happy song, a Real Happy song at number 1, and then at number 5 was quite a stressful song, and all different ones in between to represent how they felt. Okay, so 5-point scales, this is just to show you that they can be quite, they can vary quite a bit depending on the student. So the scale on the left was used last year with a year 7 student. So that's quite simple, quite straightforward, just basic information. And the scale on the right is one we used with a year 11 student last year. And as you can see, it's much more specific. So the students carry small versions of these around with them if they want to do that. And they can be really powerful in helping staff to understand what is going on for them and how to help. So the year 11 one on the right, one of the things that really helped him was just sitting and staring at traffic going past when he reached a 4 or a 5. that was what really helped him, and it was just really useful that staff can have a look at that, know that, and use that strategy with him. Okay, and this is an example of a zones of regulation chart. So these are really useful in identifying trigger points for our students and putting additional support in place for these times of the day. So some of our students have filled these in respectively by talking their day through with a member of staff, or they can do it live throughout the day as they go along. We often find that the students are surprised to see the patterns of where their difficult times are. And we also find that it helps students understand themselves better and begin to become more independent in managing their difficulties. So taking ownership of where they're finding things difficult. Okay, so I mean, I've tried to summarise what I've just said in terms of those 4 sections. I do acknowledge that this is not really a summary, this is a very long list, but that just shows, that just highlights the complicated nature of autism. So I've tried to summarise on the left some of the things that a young person with autism may have difficulties with. And I've tried to summarise some of the strategies that we use regularly at Charlton High School on the right, all of which I've already spoken about. But yeah, it is difficult to summarise something as complicated as autism. Okay, so just a little word from our students here then, I suppose. So, you know, as we know and as we acknowledge, high school can be really difficult. And this is especially true for our students with autism. And, you know, I'm not saying that we can eliminate all of the aspects of school that students find difficult, but we can call on a range of strategies and adjustments to alleviate difficulties as much as possible. So here are some quotes from some of our lovely students with autism talking about what they find difficult about school and talking about what helps them. Okay, so I just wanted to finish by highlighting where you can get more information. So there's the National Autistic Society, and there's lots of other websites and charities too, as I'm sure you're aware. Your CAMHS practitioner will have lots of information if that is applicable. You can contact the Access and Achievement team, so that's the SEN department within Charlton High School. There's the Information and Advice and Support Manchester, known as the IAS, and they offer impartial SEND advice. Just one second. And then the local offer, which is all the activities, services, advice and support on offer for young people with SEND. And then this is just a little bit more information on the local offer actually. So the website is at the top left corner, so you can see the website there, and the number and email address is in the bottom right. But if you just Google Manchester's local authority, Manchester's local offer, this will all come up. So there's lots of things around the area that you may want to get involved with, and there are also drop-in sessions where you can access advice. Okay, so that's it from me. So thank you very much for your time. I'm really pleased that so many of you have attended. It's really lovely. So please post any questions on the chat function, or which you can do now. I'll stay on for another 5 minutes and answer directly or get back to you separately. Or my email address is there, so please feel free to email anything and I'll get back to you separately there. I don't work on a Thursday, so if you do submit any questions, it will be Friday before I get back to you if you email me. So that is it. Thank you everybody for your time. and I hope it was useful, and I hope you have a lovely evening. Okay, thank you.